We celebrate the feast of St. John of the Cross. I wish all of you a very happy feast of the saint. Let us reflect for a few moments on the life, writings, and doctrine of St. John of the Cross. John of the Cross was a great mystic. He was the reformer of the Carmelite order, and he is considered the greatest poet of the Spanish language. He lived only 49 years, and he lived in an epoch which is considered the golden age of Spain. He was born at Fontiveros in Castilla in 1542 and died at Ubeda in Andalusia in 1592. He spent his early years at Medina del Campo, where he was brought up by the Jesuits, who gave him education, and he frequented their college. He was equipped with a great knowledge of literature and Greek language and Latin studies. To the surprise of all, John entered into the Carmelite monastery at Medina del Campo to become a hidden religious in the mystical tradition of Prophet Elijah. After his religious profession, he went to the University of Salamanca, where he frequented the classes on philosophy and theology. He was ordained a priest and came to Medina del Campo to celebrate first Mass for his family. Providentially, he met there Holy Mother Saint Teresa of Avila. This meeting was to be a turning point in his life. After completion of his theology in 1568, he joined Saint Teresa, and together with Father Antonio de Heredia, Deacon Jose, John reformed the way of life at Durvelo on November 28, 1568. Absolute poverty, complete silence and prayer were the trademark of the new way of life. It was accompanied by apostolic life, which consisted of teaching of catechism to the poor children of the neighboring parishes. Saint Teresa was surprised by their austerity and enthusiasm. She admired them. In the meantime, Saint Teresa was appointed the prioress of the Incarnation Convent in Avila in 1572. She called John of the Cross to become the confessor of the nuns at Incarnation. Nuns loved him and cherished his sermons and directions in spiritual life. In Avila, while he was serving the nuns of Incarnation, there took place the unfortunate event of John's arrest and incarceration in the monastery of the Discalced at Toledo. Until he escaped from that prison, out of his own wits, he stayed 9 months in the dark dungeon at Toledo. He went through physical, psychical, and spiritual sufferings in the prison. An ordinary person of medium mental, psychical capacity would have either given up all kinds of resistance or succumbed to the promises given by the Discalced Carmelites, or would have driven out of his mind. But John persisted in these dark moments of life with patience and love. He had the wisdom to understand that he was going through the passive dark night, both of the senses and of the spirit, introduced by God to purify him for greater love, the union of the soul with God. Later, he would describe the experience of the dark night of the soul with the image of someone who is imprisoned in a dark prison. His great mystic experiences at this period were translated into marvelous and mystical poems. They were considered the most beautiful poems and the masterpieces of the Spanish literature. After his escape from the prison, he spent several years of active life in the service of the Discalced Carmelite order. He was the formator of the future Discalced Carmelites, the superior of several monasteries, the definitor general and spiritual father of the Carmelite nuns. John of the Cross took up the task of writing due to the insistence of others. Besides poems, short writings, letters, he has composed 4 major works, which are commentaries to his own poems. The 4 books are The Ascent of Mount Carmel, The Dark Night, Spiritual Canticle, The Living Flame of Love. To write these 4 commentaries, he has taken 8 years of his life. 2 pivotal points of his doctrine may here be pointed out. One is the sublime absoluteness of God. God is present in all his grandeur, uniqueness, and otherness in his literary works and doctrine. Substitution of God with anything is a grave sin, an injury to his greatness and absoluteness. The only way to know God is through faith. The great concern of the saint was to show us how to deepen and strengthen our faith. The more our attachment to the created things is replaced by faith, hope, and charity, the greater is our possibility of knowing experientially who God is. The second most important point of John's doctrine is the human call to divine communion. The goal of John's doctrine and teaching is union of the soul with God. The mystical doctor will show how to reach divine union quickly and attain the freedom of spirit that is necessary to reach this lofty God. One of the favorite symbols of the saint to explain the process of union and transformation of the person in God is the ray of sunlight striking the window glass. To reach union, cleansing has to take place in our emotions, in our spiritual faculties of intellect, memory, and will. This is the active purification. The passive purification in both emotions and spirit is effected through contemplation. He calls it dark contemplation. He gives counsels to those who are reasonably mature and committed people in mind when he writes about this process of purification and union with God. The last 3 years of his life was one of tremendous suffering on account of physical illness of which he was suffering. And due to the ill treatment and misunderstanding of his superiors, the abandonment of his own beloved Carmelite friars, John faced the threat of expulsion from the very order which he had renewed. They even tried to exile him as a missionary to Mexico. He reached the monastery of Ubeda in 1591, sick, tired, and lonely. Most of the time he spent in his small room, suffering tremendously pain. And he was also a victim to the willful negligence of the superior of the monastery. But this was the great wish of John of the Cross in his life. He had confided to his own brother Francis about a vision he had of Jesus at Segovia while he was superior of that monastery in 1583. He had carved a beautiful crucifix out of wood and placed in the chapel which he himself had constructed. Our Lord appeared to him and asked him to request any favor that he wished from him, because Jesus was so well placed with that crucifix. John's reply was simple and humble. Lord, I want to suffer. I want to be treated more contemptuously for your sake. He had also desired to die in a lonely place where he was unknown to all. His wishes were granted by the Lord. He died on December 13th, midnight of 1591, unknown to all. He died in peace with the words of Psalm 122 in his dying lips. I rejoiced when I heard them say, "Let us go to the house of the Lord." He whispered to the friars who stood beside his deathbed as the bell for the midnight prayer rang, "We shall sing matins in heaven." As I conclude this short sermon on John of the Cross, I wish to point out two main traits of his personality that may help us who are now soaked in materialistic aspirations and imbued with material consumerism. On the one hand, John was wholeheartedly and single-mindedly committed to the Lord. And on the other hand, he was admirably silent about all his sufferings that he had to undergo from his own brothers during his imprisonment and in his final years of life. He desired all through his life nothing but God and God alone. He used to say that nothing short of God is worthy of God. Hence, nothing that is not God should be worthy of our love. He yearned only for a total communion with God, or the union of love with God who is love. He never judged his brothers and accused them of ill-treating them. He accepted everything as coming from the hands of God. They are the Darshanites sent by God to purify him, sanctify him, and transform him into his own beloved Son, Jesus Christ. I wish all of you, the listeners, the blessings of God through the intercession of St. John of the Cross. Amen.